You really can't find that many high-quality American-made scopes on the market nowadays, and if you do, they cost a small fortune. Leupold has been making the Mark V HD series now for quite some time, and it holds true to that mantra. At $2,500 for this illuminated version, it is quite expensive. But is it any good? Well, that is what we're going to find out together, ladies and gentlemen. When a Patreon provider of mine reached out offering this to me for review, I was extremely excited. Not only because it would be my first time behind a Mark V HD, but because I love this magnification range. Being a 2 to 10, you can use this really close and out to about 1,000 yards, so basically, incredibly painfully practical. But just because something is expensive doesn't necessarily make it good. So, let's see if this thing not only works, but is worth the price point.
Hello and welcome back to the channel, ladies and gentlemen. I have something quite special for more than one reason, two in fact. First, this is my first time with the Leupold Mark V HD, and secondly, this is the brand new 2 to 10 by 30. This was graciously sent in by a Patreon provider, but because there's a problem going on with something with my channel, if you're familiar with all of my videos, you might be able to put the pieces together. But as a result of this unfortunate situation, I'm no longer mentioning names of who sends in what to my channel. So this way, there's no sort of problems in the future. I know, some people, some companies really can ruin a great thing. With that being said, what does your $2,500 buy you? Well, it buys you this, well, decent looking box. There's nothing overly spectacular about it. But all the information that you're going to need to know is going to be on the side, and this is why you can figure out it's $2,500. It's an illuminated TMR. Leupold is one of the very few companies that will offer most of their lineup with or without illumination. And with illumination, it has a usual upcharge of around $500. But we're going to discuss throughout this entire video, not only is this worth it, but does this make sense in the long run? So, under the box, what do we have? We have some decent looking foam over here. We have a sunshade. We've got some scope caps. These are not the aluminum ones that come with the VX6s. Allen key. We have a sticker. We have a plug for the cattail on the magnification lever. And we have their rather interesting laid out owner's manual. This is everything you're going to need to know. And that's basically it. Flipping this over, there isn't a whole lot on this that we need to really know. So without further ado, let's take a look at the scope. So like I had mentioned earlier, this is my first time with the Mark V HD, and I'm really excited that's the 2 to 10 by 30, because I do think, despite the fact this thing is ludicrously expensive, it does have some potential. But ultimately, I think there's a couple of ways that we could look at this that could really have us think perhaps a different way. But I'm going to keep that all for later. Now we're just going to talk about the actual physicalities of this optic. And starting at the back, you can see we have a fast focus eyepiece. It feels like it almost has like a ratchet in there, but it's pretty smooth otherwise. Quarter turn in, a little bit of wiggle, but nothing too crazy. I do like how low profile this is. You can see there's almost no step here. So once you get this where you need it, probably put the cap on it, and you shouldn't have to worry about this thing moving out of alignment. As far as the magnification ring, it goes from 2 to 10. 10 is just shy of 180 degrees, which is nice. The included throw lever is going to be more set up for right-handed shooters or right-handed bolts, because if you're running this left-handed, you might have, I wouldn't say interference, but your hand could come over here and possibly hit this. And unfortunately, there's no way of adjusting this. You can remove it. This does unscrew. This isn't here tight, but as you saw, they already include the little cap to plug that hole if you so choose. But unfortunately, it's set up more or less for right-handers. You can hear the seal gently riding inside, but it's well damped. And it feels pretty good. There's no high spots, there's no low spots, nothing hard or soft. It's just very consistent and easy throughout the entire range, which again, I would 100% expect it for the price. Goes from 1 to 7. There are hard stops on either end. As you can see, I could not bring this from its maximum to its minimum with just a single click. I have to go all the way around. Not the end of the world. It's easy enough to just circle all the way around. But what I do like about it is it gives you a hard stop so you could remove or unscrew and then reinstall the battery compartment for your illumination control. Got a nice foam pad on the back side of the cap. We have 6 fingers that hold this battery in there fairly well. Underneath there, you can see we have a Leupold branded PCB board and a really nice looking battery compartment. As far as how the clicks sound, you've already gotten a sneak peek, but good detent, a little bit of wiggle once it's there, good amount of pressure to rotate that out, good sound. Overall, pretty damn good feeling turret. Right behind that is going to be our side focus, which is great to see on this sort of magnification range. Sometimes you need it, sometimes you don't. Doesn't say what the minimum is. Well, it says the minimum is 75, but it goes lower than that. I'm assuming it's going to be just shy of 50. And we go all the way above infinity. It is a very short throw. It's less than 180 degrees. You could hear, potentially, not rubbing per se, but just things finally breaking in, because this is brand new out of the box. Now, we've already seen turrets like this in the past with the VX6 as well as the Mark 6. You have a lock button on top, which you have to depress to then turn this. Once it goes back to 0, it will lock in place, and now you can't rotate it. It's a very good system, in my opinion. Again, this is going to be a little bit polarizing for some people. Some people would prefer a cap that you can push up, rotate, and then lock back down. But just know the limitation of this is, if you set this to whatever distance or whatever mil settings or MOA settings that you want, it could still get accidentally bumped out of place, and you could have an inaccurate shot as a result. Anyway, lock it at 0, push down, twist. We have 10.5 mils per rotation on this particular setup. I'm not too sure what the MOA version is, but the reason why they do that is so that they stagger the numbers. So this way we go from 10, 11, 12. And again, this is a 35 millimeter tube, and part of the reason why you go with a 35 millimeter tube is to have even more travel with your erectors. So let's see what this is capable of right out of the box. 20 mils. 30 mils, and we're done at 30. And I believe that's going to be capped at 30, limited to 30. I don't know what the 0 setup for this thing, so this could be, you know, perhaps slightly tweaked. If you're running this with a negative cant base, you could probably get way more than 30, but you'd have to probably reset your 0. But listen to that. There's a hard stop there. So I think this is going to be limited to 30. And honestly, when the hell are you going to need more than 30 mils of added elevation possible? I don't know of any particular experience, except for if you're running like a 22 out to like 600 plus yards. That's the only thing that makes sense. Our windage is going to be capped on this, which again, I'm a big fan of, especially with this magnification range, but more particularly when we have a tree style reticle. This TMR is not a tree style reticle, it's more of a standard milling reticle, so I might prefer the option of being able to adjust for wind a little bit easier than what we currently have. So, got the cap, unscrews like any other normal cap will, but you're going to notice the line for your 0 isn't where it normally is on the side, or at, particularly if you're looking at this, would be 9 o'clock, looking from the turret. No. It's way the fuck up here. So what that is going to do is make it quite hard to line that up. You could do it, but I just don't like it. I really don't. Why not just leave it over here, like every other scope on the friggin' planet, and just go, okay, I could easily read that. We're at like 2-ish, but is it exactly 2, or is it like 1.9? Like, you could just make it out here, but I don't know. I think on the field, I'd rather have it be, I think that's 0. Let me not drop this. Looks like 0. I guess it's not the end of the world, but I'd still rather just be here just for foolproofness. If you're looking at this quick, you might not pick it up as easily as you could if it's down here. Again, maybe personal preference, whatever. Whatever, it's capped, you're probably going to leave it alone, but if you do have to make an adjustment, a little bit of slop in the erector, very, very little, and an absolutely phenomenal sound to it. We're limited to 5 mils in each direction, and really good sounding and feeling turret. So the last thing to talk about is, of course, the weight. That's why you buy Leupold products to begin with. They're usually fairly lightweight. And as you can see here, just over 23.5 ounces is pretty lightweight for what you're getting. I do not have the Helos BTR Gen 2 on hand to show you on the scale, but I do have a USO BFX10. This is a fixed 10X, which comes in a couple of ounces heavier. Can you actually feel the weight difference between the two? You honestly can feel the difference of about 1.5 ounces to 2 ounces, or at least I can. These are both really capable optics, but you just take a look at how much smaller the Mark V is as opposed to the USO. Clearly, there is a noticeable difference in the length. It's also a little bit lighter. It's packed with features, even though I would prefer a different reticle in this thing. But damn, is it still very expensive. But that is enough babbling from me. Let's get this mounted up and see what it's like to actually use.
There's a whole lot to dig in with this one, including philosophy of use and general purpose. So, with that being said, let's take a look at the reticle. Now, there are two reticle options, the PR1 and this, the TMR. Now, the TMR is the only one that you can get illuminated currently. I'm sure that I really hope that they would come up with a different reticle, but for right now, those are the only two that you get, and you only get one illuminated option, which is this one, the TMR Illuminated. Both of them are fairly simple milled dot-ish reticles. The TMR features a nice center dot. It's not the smallest, it's not the biggest, but it's useful in those more precision rolls. But unfortunately here at 10x, the crosshairs get a little bit on the thicker side, whereas at 2x, they seem a little bit on the thinner side. Illumination on this is good. It's not great, it's not stellar, but in the MPVO/HPVO category, it is more than acceptable. But keep in mind, it's a $500 option. So, do you really need it? Well, unfortunately, that's a question that only you can answer. As for myself, I think I'd probably save the money if I was 100% set on getting a Mark V HD. But would I get this magnification range? That's truly the ultimate question, and we're going to try to answer that by the end of this video. As for the elevation turret, it is locking and it does have a zero stop. However, once you disengage the lock and turn it by 0.1 of a mil, it disengages the lock until you come back down to zero. So keep that in mind. For the price, I was expecting perhaps a little bit less slop in the erector housing. However, they sound really good, they feel really good, the lockup works, and the zero stop works well. Plus, I like the way that they staggered the numbers when you go increase your elevation, which for something like this is really nice because it goes up so high. A scope can have the nicest turrets in the world, but if it doesn't track properly, then what's the point? So, before we start tracking this thing, adjusting the side focus, nothing shifts. Everything stays exactly where it's supposed to. On a lot of scopes, even some higher end ones, when I adjust the side focus, sometimes the reticle and the image sort of shift from one another. Illumination down here looks very nice and even. No real bleed out to speak of. It's just good illumination. And I like how it illuminates the entire section, even though it would be nice to see if they did a very bright center dot. That would be really cool, but unfortunately on first focal plane optics of any sort, you can't do that unless you have a dual emitter. You can't get a fiber dot illuminated reticle on a first focal plane scope. It's just not the way it's designed. So that's why you need a dual emitter, something like you get from March. Now, Vortex and even Leupold with the Mark VI can get really bright first focal plane illumination, but ultimately that's on their LPVO line, not on their MPVOs or HPVOs. So far, 4 and 4 tracks beautifully. I did not notice that the reticle was slightly, or rather, the scope was slightly canted in the mount when I was filming this, because again, I could only see so much. 10x isn't bad, but it's not enough, especially with the thick crosshairs that this thing has, sheesh, at 10x to really know for 100% certain that I was perfectly squared up until I get in post. But as you can see here, going down 10 mils, we are up an extra tenth of a mil, so only 1% off on the elevation. When I was filming this, I thought the windage was messing up, but once I saw it in post, I saw that I just didn't have it squared up 100%. So the windage is truly perfectly fine. Now, to see if this thing is going to be repeatable, a bunch of 0 back down to 10 tests are in order, and I am happy to report that this thing had no issues returning back to 0 or gaining 10 mils and going exactly back to where we were. Honestly, it was perfectly fine. I'm going to do a bit of a supercut on the Rooftop Day solo by itself because I have a lot of comparisons that I'm going to make against this scope, and I think it's not only more enjoyable for you guys to watch, but it's also more informative because it puts it up against other competitors that you might be cross-shopping against this. So before we get into that, let's take a quick look at this by itself and see what we have. This was filmed in the early morning light, so the color tone is going to be a little bit different from what I film in the afternoon. When I have time to film, I film. Unfortunately, it's never consistent, and day-to-day is never going to be consistent as far as what the light's going to look like. Especially as we go farther into summer, everything changes. Illumination on full is just noticeable at 2x, but let's see how it turns out when we increase the magnification to its maximum. Image here at 10x at 30 yards is more than acceptable. I found that the side focus on this was a lot closer than 50 yards. I was able to get it within 20 to 30 yards, really no problem, which is really nice to see. Because honestly, I'd rather have more adjustability than less. That's one thing I really don't like about some of the European options. A lot of them only go down to 50 meters, which if you're running it on a 50-yard range, isn't good enough in most cases, especially at the higher magnifications. This thing only being a 10x shouldn't be as noticeable, but it's still a nice feature to have. Now we are going to talk about the limitations of this magnification range. It is a 2 to 10, but honestly from my findings from testing prisms, LPVOs, and even some MPVOs, a 2x on something like a DMR style rifle is more than adequate. I can easily shoot at 50 yards and even a little bit farther closer on larger targets rather quickly if you're shooting with both eyes open and you have a good sense of your surroundings. Is it nice to have a 1x? Yeah, but honestly, only if you're really, really close and you're trying to replicate what you could do with a red dot. For everything else, a little bit of magnification like this really isn't that much of a problem. My ultimate question with this video isn't necessarily to find out if the magnification range is good or useful. I already know the answer for that. Yes, it is, and yes, it is. But my question is more or less to answer specifically around the Mark V HD. Is this version, the 2 to 10, better than its larger brother, the 3.6 to 18? Because at the end of the day, they're the exact same price, and you can get the exact same reticles, and guess what? It's only a slight weight penalty going up to the next magnification range. And is the 2 to 3.6 a really big difference? We're going to take note of that very soon, but for right now, the image here at 400 yards at 10x is quite nice. We do have a lot of mirage. It was a unseasonably cold day at the end of winter, actually rather early spring, and my apartment was boiling. So we do have a lot of distortion going on with the air going from inside my apartment to outside, which is why you see so much mirage. But by itself, there is some chromatic aberration creeping up under that parapet wall on those windows, but beyond that, it is a very good looking image with a very large depth of field. There's a lot of stuff in focus, which I really like to see. Moving our attention now to our 900-yard power tower, adjusting the side focus ever so much that everything is perfectly sharp where we want it, despite the fact the Mirage is absolutely kicking the crap out of the overall image quality here. We're now going to see how forgiving the Eyebox is on this. Shifting the camera side to side, you can see that the shadow at 10x really does creep up fairly quickly. However, the reticle and the image stays quite sharp all the way out into the shadows. So when you are behind this thing and trying to get in a good Eyebox on it or a good cheek weld in an awkward position, just know that as long as you could look through it, you can at least figure out where roughly you're aiming. A lot of scopes recently have been not doing so well with this. Either the reticle will fall short or the image, or a combination of the two of them. At around 8x, the image only performs even better. Of course, the exit pupil is going to be a little bit larger the lower down magnification range that we go in, so being here where we are currently, it's honestly a lot better. Stepping down the magnification even more to about 4x, guess what? We're going to have more of the same. The lower down in the magnification we go, the larger the exit pupil, and thus the more room we're going to have to work. Honestly, the 2x on this thing was incredibly impressive to get behind. And the same could be said all the way up to about 8x. But unfortunately at 10x, like you'll soon see at small bore, it does get pretty tight. A little bit more tight than I was expecting. The whole point of having a lower powered MPVO like this is, in my opinion, flexibility. You should be able to use this thing at 2x in relatively close engagements, inside 50 yards, let's say, or capable of out to 1,000 yards on a man-size-ish target. So far, at least with the lower magnifications, this thing seems to perform quite well. But let's get a different perspective on it. Here at the 50-yard line, we are starting at 2x with the illumination on full and the side focus not properly set, so the image isn't going to look as good as it does until we get to 10x. Here at 2x, honestly, it is very good, on par with some really high-end LPVOs around the same magnification. It's very forgiving side to side and forward to back, so if you do plan on getting behind this thing in a hurry, you have no problems with it. At 6x, we get about more of the same. On the higher end spectrum of LPVOs at 6x, this is right around where you'd expect that to be, which I guess isn't terrible, but I was kind of hoping for a little bit more, again because this thing goes all the way up to 10, and it's got a really large tube, but it's still a fairly small front objective. At 10x, like I was saying, it might produce a very sharp image when properly behind it, but it is quite finicky. See how quickly those shadows really creep up. It's not ideal, but again, I guess it could be worse. But ultimately, if you are really worried about the tight eyebox, you back it down to about 8x or so and you have no problems unless you are perfectly situated behind it. But unfortunately, it's going to be a little bit more challenging to get behind this thing in an off position and use the entire magnification range. So again, something to keep in mind. Without further ado, let's get this thing side by side with some comparisons. And the first competitor is going to be the Athlon Helos BTR Gen 2 2-12x42. This thing I have been running really hard on my Ruger American Ranch, and let me tell you something, it hasn't skipped a beat. But it is far from over with the torture that I plan on putting this thing through. Because Woodland Brutality, by the time this video drops, is probably currently going, and I'm beating the shit out of it. So we'll see if it holds up to that. The Athlon is a fifth the price of this Leupold. Now keep in mind, it is a Chinese-made scope, but truth be told, there's a lot going on with this Athlon that I kind of prefer over the Leupold. First things first, maybe you might notice the reticle. The reticle, in my opinion, this AMHR2 reticle from Athlon is actually very practical and useful. Very easy for my eye to pick that up and go, oh, boom, there's the center. Even better than what we see with the TMR. But more so than that, just look at the view looking through the Athlon versus the Leupold. It's actually quite large. Much larger, in fact. Despite the fact that the Athlon is a 30mm tube versus a 35 with the Leupold, the difference really comes with the front objective going from 30 to 42. The balance of the Athlon as a whole is truly impressive, especially when you factor in the price point. They come in below $500. I've seen them routinely come for the low to mid 400s. You could even find some used for even cheaper. So that is insanely impressive, especially here at our 400-yard brick building. Now, yes, it is true. There's a lot of Mirage in one and zero Mirage in the other, but you cannot take away the image quality on the Athlon. It is painfully impressive. Now, it is true, at 12x it isn't as good as it is at 10x, but the 12x is still more than usable. And in my opinion, reticles are very personal. You might love the TMR and hate what the Athlon has to offer, but I'm the exact opposite. I can work with the TMR, but the reticle is just so much more fine-tuned for this magnification range with the Athlon. The same thing can be said with the Meopta O6 with the MRAD1 reticle. It's just a better reticle for the magnification range. I really think the TMR reticle is just sort of shoehorned into this magnification setup and not really optimized. Optimized being the key word. If you have a scope that you dedicate to being a particular way, why not make everything function around it as perfectly as you can? Not just say, well, we got this on the shelf, just throw it in there, it'll be fine. I really think Leupold is dropping the ball by not customizing a reticle such as this or the MRAD1 to use in this magnification range, and it's absolutely a handicap. Next up is, of course, the Meopta O6 3-18x50 featuring the MRAD1 reticle. Now, this is true. These are not direct competitors. There's a whole 1x difference at the low end, 2 on the left, 3 on the right. But is that enough of a difference to make you go one versus the other? Especially when you factor in that there's 8 extra X to play with the Meopta as opposed to the Leupold, or at least this 2-10 version. Again, with the reticle, the MRAD1 is basically perfect. The only thing I'd like to see is a 6 o'clock post that mirrors what is at 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock, but you can't have everything. If you're wondering why Meopta doesn't have a first focal plane version of the 2-12, I don't know either. I emailed them, and they still haven't gotten back to me, and I'm quite upset about that, because they would absolutely clean up the market if they did, especially if they kept the price somewhat normal to what this is, which is around the $700-800-ish price point. You can find them for cheaper on sale in the 600s, and at that point, it is an absolute buy it now price. Now, yes, the Meopta is less expensive by about a third the price of this Leupold with, illumination, but it also comes in at 3 inches longer and 6 ounces heavier than the Leupold does. If that is fine by you, then great. As far as how both of these look when you're looking through them, well, these are both set at 10x, or at least the Meopta is as close to 10x as I can get indicated on the magnification ring. Obviously, the Leupold's at maximum. And here, yes, there is a ton of mirage, I get it, but I'm still going to give it to the Meopta. It just has such a good balance of sharpness, resolution, and overall color representation. But the Leupold is no slouch either. Is it 3 times the price better? I'm not too sure, especially when you factor in that the Meopta has an extra 8 usable X to play around with, and that is huge. Another thing to keep in mind is with the Eyebox on something like a 3-18, if you are running it at 10x, it's probably guaranteed going to be much larger than what this Leupold or any other MPVO of that magnification range that maxes out at, let's say, 10x will be. So, another thing to keep in mind. The Meopta is something that I've loved ever since the first day that I bought it, and I've stopped myself from buying multiples of them simply because I don't need multiples of the same scope. However, if I was to build multiple setups and build it for the purpose of simplicity's sake, then yes, I would have multiples of these Optica 6s. They are definitely something I have defaulted to and will continue to in the future if I so see fit. At 10x here at 900-ish yards, the images speak for themselves. The Meopta has been a home run ever since the beginning and continues to do so and still gets beaten daily. Well, maybe not daily, but very, very often. Next up is a scope you guys haven't seen before. This is a sneak peek of the Nightforce NX8 2.5 to 20 by 50. If you thought that the Meopta was a big jump in magnification range over the Leupold, then this is even more so. Being an 8x multiplier, 2.5 to 20 is a giant span of magnification. You only have an extra half an X at the low end, but double the overall possible magnification of the Leupold. It's nuts. And guess what? It's a usable double X. Here at 20x with the Nightforce, we have a gorgeous looking image at 30 yards. And guess what, ladies and gentlemen? It does not stop there. What's even more enticing is that the Nightforce is actually cheaper than the Leupold. It comes with a 30mm tube, so you are missing out on that, but it does have a much larger front objective, being a 50mm. However, even if we were to talk about the 3.6 to 18 version of the Leupold Mark V, that's only a 44mm front objective. Here, side by side, you can clearly see that the image on the Nightforce is larger, but look at the view through the scope. These are set to the exact same crops, and the Nightforce has a giant view looking through it. It is, without getting too far in detail, beautiful. I set the Nightforce to around 10x, but I missed because I didn't have this. This is all done in post, and it's around 12-ish x, but the image here is gorgeous. Absolutely beautiful. Colors are great. Sharpness is great. There's almost no chromatic aberration to speak of, and the Eyebox in it is very, very usable. But the reticle is even harder to use with the magnification range than the TMR. This is the MIL XT reticle, which is beautiful above 5x, However, below that, it really just sort of disappears. Again, talking about non-optimized reticles for certain magnification ranges, the MIL-XT reticle is another such case where Nightforce just said, hey, oh, we got this reticle on the shelf. Oh, we got this new magnification range. Fuck it, send it. And they sent it. It's really a beautiful reticle, but only when you're above like 5 or 6x. So at 2.5x, the reticle sort of just like disappears, and it really makes the whole point of having a lower powered MPVO kind of a moot point. But you cannot deny the fact that double the top end magnification is quite usable and useful when you want it or need it. You might not need it, but guess what? You can run in this thing at 10x and have the exact same sort of magnification as you do with the Leupold. The Nightforce is only about 2 inches longer and only about 4 ounces heavier, so it's not like you're getting a really big size or weight penalty, especially for even less money. So, definitely something to consider, even though it does not have a locking elevation turret. Now hear me out. Don't think that I'm knocking the Mark V HD. It in fact does have a lot of really good redeeming features. And here at 1,000 yards, again, despite the mirage, it still has a pretty good looking image even though we're only at 10x. But increase the elevation by plus 10 mils and the image does not change whatsoever. In fact, I think the image gets a little bit sharper and a little bit cleaner in some areas, which is exactly what you'd hope would happen when you're dialing for elevation at great distance. But guess what? Add another 10 mils to a total of 20 mils of elevation, and the image is still quite usable. In fact, I would say more than average in most cases. But because this has a giant 35mm tube and only a 5x multiplier, you can add another 10 whole mils to a total of 30 plus mils of elevation. And guess what? The image still looks very good. I'm going to stop my voiceover and let you listen to the in-video audio.
The best part about these is definitely the image stability. Unquestionable. Unparalleled.
Just listen to how many times I spun that turret around. 3 full times from 0 to 30. It was quite impressive. There's only one other optic that I've ever had where I can gain that much elevation and still have a good looking image, and it's something that you guys haven't seen yet. But it is another 10x optic.
Absolutely sublime.
Again, due to the slightly smaller front objective size of 30mm, one might question whether this thing is going to let in a adequate amount of light in lower light environments, such as you see here. But keep in mind, this is only a 5x magnifier. It's a 2 to 10, so it's only a 5x. Most modern scopes are 6 to 8 and even sometimes more than that. And it really makes me wonder why Leupold is still investing so much in their 5x series. But you know what? I can absolutely understand that because they're tried and true, they're very reliable, and they have very good stable images as well as a fair amount of light that comes in it. Just look at it here. It's well past 7 o'clock, early part of the spring rather, and the image is perfectly fine, very usable and lets in a lot of light. The illumination starts to come into its own, but again, it's good. It's not stellar, it's not great. You can see that it's brighter on the top left as opposed to the bottom right part of the image, and it's good enough for most cases, but I don't know if it's $500 good enough. But at least if you're going to be using this in lower light environments, it is perfectly fine. So now I'm going to ask you this very important question, even though we're 33 minutes and 48 seconds into this video. Is the 2 to 10 worth it? That is a question that I don't really know the answer to, especially when this thing's larger brother, like I mentioned earlier, the 3.6 to 18 by 44 is the exact same price with the exact same reticle options. So here it is at 2x. Going from 2 to 3x, do you really lose that much? To many people out there, probably not. To some, yes. I think it all ultimately really depends on if you're going to be running this optic or another optic, an MPVO or an HPVO, with an offset red dot. It's been coming up a lot. I've seen so many setups with people running even LPVOs with an offset red dot. But if you are running an offset red dot, are you doing the right move going with a 2 to 10 as opposed to 3.6 to 18? Here at 3.6x-ish, you're really not losing that much over 3x. Over 2x, sure, But by itself, if you're running this again in conjunction with an offset red dot, are you really losing that much? I don't think so. I think you're losing more in the top end. So here we are at 10x, this scope's highest magnification range. As we already saw, it's adequate. It's fine. The Eyebox does get a little tight, but the image is still pretty good, and you do have a massive amount of adjustability. But what's more important? That extra, I'll say it like this, if you're staying with the Mark V series, is the extra 1.6x of lower magnification going from 3.6 to 2 more important, or going from 10, which is as you see here with my Meopta Optica 6 3 to 18, or going from 10x to 18x more important for you? That is a very good question, and one again that only you can answer. I think if you're going to be running this with an offset red dot, I think I'd probably go with the 3.6 to 18, even though I have no experience with it. But for the exact same price, I think you're shortchanging yourself by a lot of magnification. But if you aren't planning on running an offset red dot, maybe the 2 to 10 is your better choice. Let's make a few more comparisons, but this time with a beloved MPVO of mine, the PST Gen 1 2.5 to 10 by 32. This is a first focal plane optic, of course, but it definitely is starting to show its age in more ways than one, unfortunately. The exposed elevation and windage turrets are non-locking, and the zero stop was using an archaic setup of shims, which if you jam the erector, or rather the cap, all the way down, you could possibly damage the erector. The illumination was basically non-existent, but it was still a good feeling as far as well-made optic, and it really was my introduction into the MPVO world of this sort of magnification range. And it was, up until very recently, the go-to MPVO of all time. I say so because I actually just sold mine. I said I never would, but there have been reports of some of them breaking, and I never ran mine as hard as I probably wanted to on my 308, but for good reason, because that gun was just unwieldy and painful. But Hoppophile had one of these, and it broke twice on him. And on the second time, Vortex said they couldn't fix it, and they instead gave him a new one, which makes you wonder how many new ones of these are floating around. It makes you wonder. It's still a great optic that can produce a very phenomenal looking image. Here at 10x, these are both at 10x, about 180 yards. These are filmed on 2 totally separate days, but close enough to give you a good idea of how they're going to work together. And the PST produces a phenomenal image, but it's a much smaller image than what the Mark V is capable of producing. And the Mark V is not really a very big looking image when you look through this thing, especially when we look at our next scope. But the PST Gen 1 did have me wonder about its overall longevity. And once you start having doubts like that, it's unfortunate because you can't really get away from that. The image through it also, again, going back to how small it is, it's very small. And the scope body around it is gigantic. And it was really a pet peeve of mine. I love the scope, but it had a lot of little things that I would love to have seen change. And unfortunately, they did not do that with the Gen 2 PST. In fact, it was basically more of the same, and they made it way heavier than it had any right to be. The PST Gen 1 was svelte. It was about the same weight as this Mark V, albeit with a 30mm tube and a 32mm front objective. Of course, I'm getting tongue-tied again. However, despite its age and its inherent flaws, the Filipino-made PST Gen 1 produced an exceptional-looking image. Here at 300 yards, unless you really knew what you were looking at, it would be a little hard to tell the difference between these two. And again, you could find the PST Gen 1s for like $400 to $500-ish, depending on where you find one and what sort of condition that they're in. And if it's something that you're willing to give a shot with, then it is an excellent choice. I said at the very beginning of the video that there aren't that many American-made high-quality scopes anymore, and that holds somewhat true. But on the right is a USO MR10. It is an old-school 1.8 to 10x MPVO, and it's something that I had bought, reviewed, liked, and ended up selling because I didn't like it enough. There was a couple things about it which I will eventually get around to making the review on, but it was just, it was nuisance stuff, like the tunneling going from 1.8 to like 3x, which was just like put my head through a wall bad. But at 10x, holy cow, is it a beautiful looking thing. And it was built like a tank. The Mark Vs feel really good in hand. They feel solid. But there's something about an American-made USO that makes you think you could drive nails with it. It is incredible. And it's backed by an absolutely phenomenal customer service setup with USO. They will bend over backwards for you. In fact, this one was sent in for a checkup. And they said, no problem, sir. Boom, boom, boom. Like a week and a half later, they completely disassembled it. They cleaned everything. They serviced everything. Oh, it was awesome. They give you this check sheet that you go down. And it was just phenomenal. And I love the scope, but not enough to keep it. But when I sold it, I bought a fixed 10x, which you'll be seeing soon again, because the fixed 10x is even better, and I still have that. It's fucking awesome. It's really, really cool. But here, yes, you can still find these $1,000 plus. They are heavier by a couple ounces, but the tunneling from 1.8 to about 3 is really rough, and something that it just doesn't excite me because it takes you away from the entire experience. You can't really use the lower magnification as much as you can with the 2x on the Leupold. Again, though, that USO looks so crispy. It is beautiful, and the color representation, mwah. I want to end this video with my conclusion here, looking side by side again with the Nightforce NX8 2.5 to 20 by 50. Because, all in all, it makes you wonder which is the better purchase between these two. Yeah, there is a 0.5x discrepancy at the bottom end, but again, twice the amount of magnification at the top end, and you can't get away from that fact. I think the biggest thing between these two is definitely going to be the reticle choice. I don't like either of them. I think for the magnification range is justified here. Again, the MIL-XT on the Nightforce is beautiful above 5 or 6x, but below that, it just falls apart and you can't really find it. It's hard when you're trying to search with it on smaller targets. Basically becomes almost useless. At least with the duplex-ish TMR at 2x, you could at least pick it up, but still, it's not as optimized as what we saw with the Athlon Helos BTR Gen 2 or the Meopta O6. Those are just better setup reticles for the magnification range, which really bothers me that Meopta's still not going to do a 2 to 12, or at least they haven't answered me yet. I'll send them another email, but I'm not being overly optimistic on that. So, final thoughts on the Mark V HD 2 to 10 by 30. It's got a lot of things going for it. It's American made, it's got a really good feel about it, all the controls work, it tracks great, the glass is very good, and it's very forgiving, and you have almost no distortion on this thing. At 2x, it's flat as can be. At 10x, it's flat as can be. You have no tunneling. You have nothing of that sort. You do have some chromatic aberration that pops up from time to time, but it's not overly obtrusive like we see with some European optics. Some of the design features, such as the locking elevation turret, is something that you will have to ask yourself if it's right for you, because if you want to lock it at a certain elevation gain, you can't. You gotta just crank it up, leave it there, and hope that it doesn't get bounced around and then lose your zero. But I do like the zero stop on it. I do like how they stagger the numbers on the elevation turret so you know exactly what number you're at. It just seems well laid out in that regard. Unlike the elevation turret, where you have that offset hash marking, it's kind of hard to see exactly where you are. But ultimately, you're going to set this thing and forget it because the windage is capped. But again, the TMR reticle isn't, again, ideally optimized for having a capped windage, in my opinion. Having at least a tree reticle with some sort of hold, at least a mil or two out from either side for windage, would really, it would make a lot more sense and be a lot more usable. But again, different strokes for different folks. You might love it, you might hate it. So the ultimate question is this worth its $2,500 price point? Well, for me, I'd probably do away with the illumination. It's nice, and I really like having illumination, but it's an extra $500. You could put that money into an offset red dot and really broaden the horizons of what's capable with an optic setup. You at least then at that point have a true 1x that you could run in conjunction with any magnification range. And that's going to be another question. If you're running an offset red dot, do you run the 2 to 10 or the 3.6 to 18 or the 5 to 25 or the 7 to 35? There's a lot of questions that get thrown around. If you're running just the 2 to 10, up to you. Would I run just the 2 to 10 by itself? Yeah, I probably would, even though the reticle is not my ideal choice. But truth be told, it's probably the best overall package I've gotten my hands on. It's very expensive, yes, but that cost goes into American pockets. It goes into American companies. It goes into people that you might even know. And that is important for people like myself. However, it's still a large, heavy pill to swallow. I don't know if I'd ultimately be willing to go with the 2 to 10, primarily because I think I'd rather sacrifice that extra 1.6x at the bottom and get an extra 8x at the top. So this is a niche scope. If this thing was $1,500 on Illuminated, then yeah, that would make a lot more sense. But I just think for the price point, you can literally get any other of the Mark V HD series. And at that point, it really makes you scratch your head as to what's going to be the best purchase for yourself. And that's, unfortunately, a question I can't answer. As far as how this thing performs, it performed flawlessly. And I have no doubt will continue to do so. Do I like this thing? I really do. Do I love it? Not enough to buy one. But maybe a 3.6 to 18, maybe a 5 to 25, maybe. But only time will tell with that one. And that is going to do it for this video, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all very much for watching. And as always, see you again next time. And a huge thank you to my Patreon providers and my Subscribe Stars subscribers. Without you, this truly wouldn't be possible. If you'd like to support my channel but don't want to join either of those, I completely understand. But you could still help by using my affiliate links in the description below, and or like, share, and subscribe as always. Again, thank you very much.